Our topic for this Hi, my name is John Goodman. Our topic for this presentation is love letters in residential real estate. It comes up in this situation. Right now we're experiencing this phenomenon where there are shortages and sometimes even hyper shortages of inventory. So buyers contemplating that they might be competing against a dozen other buyers to purchase a property not only want to make their offer as attractive as possible based upon the financial terms of the offer, but they also try and compete based on who they are. So sometimes they submit an offer with a letter that might say something like, hey, we love our house. We saw it with our 2 kids. Our little son Joey is in love with the east bedroom, and our daughter Sarah is in love with the south bedroom. It would be such a joy to have them walk to the same school that I understand your kids went to. Now, of course, the buyer who is submitting that offer is doing so without making any conscious attempt to try and induce the seller to discriminate against anybody. But the theory of what I'm talking about here, the legal theory is that in the course of asking the seller to discriminate in favor of this particular buyer because they have kids, because they're a family, because they're an age at which they have kids who walk to school, and because their kids can walk, arguably this kind of love letter is asking the seller to discriminate in favor of this buyer based upon familial status, based upon age, and based upon the ability of the buyer. And of course, if you're asking the seller to discriminate in favor of you based upon these things, the flip side has to be true. You're asking the seller to discriminate against your competitors who don't have those characteristics. And of course, if the seller does discriminate against them and in favor of you because of those characteristics, that implicates federal fair housing laws. Actually, I said that in too lawyery a way. That is a violation of federal fair housing laws. Now, as I talk to you about this, I'm recording this in 2015. I do not have an actual case. I do not have a rule. I do not have a statute that specifically speaks to this love letter issue. But what I can say is I can imagine lots of clients of mine, for example, who if they were the empty nesters without kids who are competing to buy that property, and if they lost out for that reason, that the seller preferred to sell the property to other buyers who are more like the sellers, I would be ticked about it. So what can sellers and listing brokers do? If I'm a seller, I don't want to see these love letters. It's not unusual for people to perceive that they are being discriminated against based upon their membership in a protected class. And I'm not naive to think that there is actual discrimination, actual conscious discrimination that takes place because of people's membership in a protected class. But what I think is a much more pernicious issue, much more pernicious than conscious discrimination, which I think is quite rare, is subconscious discrimination. And it's not anything to be embarrassed about. We don't have any control about it. That's why it's called subconscious. But one way of protecting against subconscious discrimination is to know as little about your buyers other than the financial terms as possible. If I'm a seller, I don't want to see those things. If I'm a listing broker, as I am taking my listing with the seller, I want to have communication with my seller. In Colorado, our listing agreements have a fair housing paragraph in them. And as I'm covering that with my seller clients, I would have a discussion like, it's not about white, it's not about black, it's about green. And if I was you, I wouldn't want to see these federal fair housing, I would not want to see these love letters. I would not want to raise your risk, seller, of being accused of or being convicted of violating federal fair housing laws, and try and get buy-in from the sellers that they don't want to see them. Okay, on the buyer side, it's more problematic. But if I'm a buyer or I'm working with a buyer, we have to be frank with our buyers. Sometimes these make a difference. But if they do make a difference, essentially the seller is discriminating in favor of you against other people. There's fair housing ramifications, and encourage your buyers to compete based on terms, not based on who they are. If a buyer or seller chooses to disregard their broker in that matter, then I think what the broker needs to do is consult with that broker's attorney case by case. There's too much at stake. There's too much subtlety here. There's too many conflicting duties that the broker has. You need to confer with a lawyer in your state, case by case. With that, ladies and gentlemen, all I'll say is, with the love letter phenomenon, be careful and good luck.